Deep inside the confines of Arkham Asylum, locked away in a corner and now only accessible through the ventilation shafts, there's a cell. Not surprising, it's an asylum, it kinda comes with the territory. But there's something different about this cell. For starters, it's in the wrong place. Most of the other cells are in the penitentiary or the intensive treatment center, but this one is in the middle of Arkham Mansion, which is the home to the records room, the doctor's and warden's offices, and the library. Why would an inmate's cell be here? The cell is also littered with a heap of patient records, so it obviously wasn't in active use even before the prison break that the game opens on, and there's a beetle on the door, a symbol that appears in many places around the asylum, but never on any cell doors, only this one. But most off-putting are the scrawlings on the walls and floor of the cell, spirals repeated over and over wherever they could fit in the cramped room, indicating a high level of insanity in whoever put them there, but also purpose and determination. The spirals are very intentionally drawn as if to ward off evil, even featuring symbols of the cross and aligning with historic, ritualistic methods of protecting oneself from evil, like salt circles and protective spells chiseled into stone. Whoever was in here was trying to save themselves from something. Now, the game isn't shy about whose cell this is, and a lot of you watching this video, if you've played the game before, already know who it belonged to, but what you might not know is the true depravity of the story behind it, the effect it had on the asylum at large, and the many dark corners of Rocksteady's Arkham Asylum that make it such a masterclass in environmental horror. Among the many inspirations for Arkham Asylum, none is more important than the comic of the same name that came out 2 decades prior, Arkham Asylum, A Serious House on Serious Earth. A ghoulish, harrowing journey into the facility that Batman is more than happy to send Gotham's criminals to, but one that he's too terrified to visit himself in fear of what it'll do to him. While the game takes a lot of liberties with the premise of the 1989 classic, its influence is best seen in the story of the asylum's founder, Amadeus Arkham, as well as the Christian imagery and psychological horror elements found throughout the game. And today I wanted to take some time to talk about those things, the mysteries, the hidden narratives, and the overall atmosphere that defined Arkham Asylum, in an attempt to not only put together a comprehensive log of the horror elements of this game, but also discuss what it means for Batman, his rogues gallery, and actual inmates in real-life psychiatric hospitals. But that is a lot of stuff to cover, so I've actually enlisted a little bit of help from my friend Landen, who's going to be popping up here and there throughout this video. Basically, if you hear somebody's voice and it sounds a lot sexier than mine, it's this dude. He has his own YouTube channel, it's linked in the description. He's done videos on the horror of Fallout and Red Dead Redemption, among other things, so if you're looking for more of this kind of stuff after this particular deep dive, go check him out. Also, hi, punching in from the future when I'm very sick. This video is mainly going to be discussing the horror elements of the game, as well as some important moments from the comic, but if you also want to hear our more general thoughts on the game, there's a whole other video on my second channel that you should totally go watch after. With that all out of the way, I think it's finally time that we meet the film. Before we get any further, we'd like to dedicate this video to Comicstorian. He was a big part of mine and Landon's initial interest in comics, which spawned into greater appreciation for other superhero content, and Batman in particular. I honestly don't think that either of us would have been interested in making this video if it wasn't for this channel and the interest it sparked in both of us. And there are certain sections of this video that discuss the Arkham Asylum comic, which have been just heavily inspired by his work. So in honor of his passing earlier this year, we wanted to recognize his contribution to this community in any way we could. Thank you for being such a big inspiration to us, for furthering our interest in this medium that we love so much now. I hope we can in some way help carry that legacy forward. Please enjoy the rest of the video.
Gotham, 1890. Amadeus Arkham was born in the late 19th century to Elizabeth Arkham, a widowed mother tormented by her own personal demons. Much like the Waynes and Cobblepots, the Arkham family was a core pillar to the development of Gotham.
My family's blood ran through the heart of Gotham. We were doctors, politicians, and teachers. We have been the organ cleaning the arterial filth from the city. We have been its servants, giving all to protect it. And still it has chosen to hurt us.
One fateful night, Amadeus approached the room to his bedridden mother to give her dinner, only to find that she had been consuming beetles as a means to protect herself from something. something Amadeus couldn't quite understand. Amadeus saw Gotham as he saw his own mother, a body slowly enveloping with pain and suffering. It inspired him to pursue a career in psychiatry, in hopes of saving people like his mother, victims who were tormented by their very own mind. Amadeus studied in cities like Metropolis and Keystone, until he earned a job at Metropolis State Psychiatric Hospital. There in Metropolis, Amadeus married a woman named Constance, and together they bore a child. Amongst the patients he treated, no one stuck out quite like Martin Mad Dog Hawkins. A misogynist serial killer who claimed visions of the Virgin Mary coerced him to go out and stop the dirty elves from spreading their disease. Hawkins never forgot the face of Amadeus, and Amadeus never forgot the face of Hawkins long after their initial counseling. Upon returning to Gotham City, Amadeus was now a highly respected psychiatrist, as well as a loving husband and father. After years of not seeing each other, Amadeus had now returned to his mother, whose mental state had deteriorated significantly. Visions of some demonic winged creature never ceased, alongside dementia that decayed her own memories and experiences. In a critical mental state, Elizabeth Arkham would tragically take her own life, slitting her throat with a razor blade, and leaving Amadeus with everything that she owned.
The grounds of Arkham Asylum are an extension of the Arkham Mansion, a regal manor off the coast of Gotham that had for decades been home to a highly influential family that seemed cursed with misfortune. Despite the facelift the area went through during its transition from family home to psychiatric hospital, the Gothic architecture that originally defined the area, and much of Gotham, remained mostly intact. Buildings are imposing and ornate, lined with angelic statues, and topped with spires that are commonly linked to 19th century architecture. The island would almost be darkly beautiful if it wasn't also home to the city's worst nightmares. The asylum's physical location, lying off to the side of the city proper, is a clear indication of its place in society. It's an island that holds the insanity at bay, as far away as possible from the general populace so that no one has to give it any real mind. It is ridiculously easy to just turn a blind eye to what's happening at the asylum. It doesn't really matter what's happening there as long as it's away from normal people. The looming gargoyles that became a staple in the franchise of course match the Gothic design of the buildings in general and mirror Batman's presence in the area, but historically, gargoyles have also been used as a means of warding off evil, much like the spirals found in that cell from earlier. Gargoyles were often placed on churches and cathedrals to mark these locations as sanctuaries, places of refuge where fugitives could hide away from their pursuers without facing harm, and yes, most of my research did come from the Hunchback of Notre Dame. A lot of the asylum's design has deeply Christian roots, which makes sense considering how much religion actually plays a part in the concept of asylums themselves. The earliest recorded concept of this kind of safe haven actually dates back to ancient Israel, where those who committed manslaughter were granted safety from the victim's family within certain designated cities. But a version of this idea extends to most religions and time periods, with the word asylum in particular being of Greek origin and translating roughly to a place safe from violence. Oops. Many 19th and 20th century asylums would base a lot of their methods on Christian doctrine, which is what ends up being reflected in not only the visual language of Arkham Asylum, but also a lot of the symbolism found in both the comic and the game. The subtitle of the comic is A Serious House on Serious Earth, an excerpt from Philip Larkin's 1954 poem Church Going, where a serious house, a church, is a building in which fundamental and serious matters of the human condition are addressed, and serious earth is the environment in which we struggle with those matters. The poem essentially outlines the importance of the church in dealing with our philosophical dilemmas even if people choose to move away from formal religion, and Morrison's use of the phrase in the comic creates a direct parallel between the exploration of meaning, madness, good, evil, and reason in a church and in an asylum. As both a religious man and a renowned psychiatrist, Amadeus Arkham believed that reason would always prevail over the irrational, and to represent his optimistic outlook on the work he would do at the asylum, he erected a statue of Saint Michael triumphing over a dragon, not knowing at the time that this would later come to represent a cruel twist in fate. Other statues and art in this game represent nurturing figures and other victories of good over evil, but one of the most recurring symbols comes in the form of the scarab beetle, which can be found in the halls, on guardrails, on doors, in the glass, and in one instance, on a cell. In ancient Egypt, beetles represented rebirth due to their unique process of laying eggs in their own excrement. I don't know, there's no better way of saying that. More than just rebirth though, beetles represent the idea of cycles, which is something that's not only important to this game and this comic, but to Batman stories in general. The cyclical nature of insanity, the constant pattern of crime, capture, and escape with every villain, even the Joker cycling through his many personalities, something that became an important part of canon recently with the 3 Jokers, but Morrison actually touched on this in the late 80s with the Asylum comic by saying that Joker experienced a form of super sanity, where the sheer amount of chaotic input he received could only be handled by constantly adapting to a new personality. Although he did later say that a more conventional case of multiple personality disorder would have probably made more sense. But maybe in this case, the symbol of rebirth is meant to represent the asylum itself. It was, after all, made anew after Amadeus's mother's death, and has been molded since to be in the shape of the new warden in Quincy Sharp, with Amadeus and his influence becoming a mere shadow in the presence of all the pro-Sharp paraphernalia. Statues, banners, and paintings of the new head of Arkham can be found in every building, and it's clear Sharp sees himself as almost a messiah of sorts. One statue of Sharp actually reads, "Sanity fighting the madness," a direct reference to the message conveyed by the St. Michael statue, and not exactly a humble one. And another is placed in the Arkham mansion where Amadeus grew up, as almost a projection of the central statue in the main hall. In banners and flyers, Quincy Sharp proclaims himself to be the voice of Arkham, and it's clear that at this point the facility has been reborn in his image. It's no shock then that Arkham is in as bad a shape as it is, coming from a long line of failed attempts at creating something greater and eventually just decaying and being reborn again in harsher tones. It's a madhouse with appropriately haunting architecture and walls that whisper stories of pain and suffering to those unfortunate enough to be trapped there now. But the derelict environment is still just the beginning. After all, an asylum is only as insane as those in it.
As the heir to the Arkham Landen fortune, Amadeus was now the sole owner of his mother's homestead, to which he was determined to transform into his own facility for the mentally ill. He enlisted the help of the Gotham visionary Cyrus Pinckney, an architect who is responsible for designing many iconic buildings within Gotham City. With the financial backing of Solomon Wayne and the design expertise of Cyrus Pinckney, Elizabeth Arkham Asylum for the criminally insane was established in 1921, a triumphant accomplishment for Amadeus Arkham.
I began my day returning home in good spirits, eager to see my wife and family. I ended it kneeling in their blood, broken fragments of my life, pouring through dripping red fingers.
Carved into the body of his wife, Constance, was the name Mad Dog, alongside the mutilated body of his child, who was missing her head. As Amadeus scanned the room, he caught the eye of his daughter peering from inside the dollhouse, the cold look of what was once his pride and joy. Mad Dog Hawkins escaped Metropolis State Psychiatric Hospital for a single purpose: to torment Amadeus, to break him. Amadeus sat in the room of death as he slowly and methodically put on his mother's wedding dress, sobbing, choking, and retching throughout the night. Amadeus thought to himself,
"Is this what it all comes down to? All of our dreams and hopes and aspirations, nothing but vomit? Oh God, I'm afraid. I'm so afraid."
Hawkins was captured and brought forth to Amadeus, who on the surface was less broken up over his family and more eager to explore the mind of Hawkins.
They brought the animal before me, shameless and barking like a mad dog. For what felt like days, I endured his boasts. He took pleasure recounting his actions, cataloguing his depraved crimes. What should have been revenge turned to pity. This poor dog needed my help.
With that, Martin Hawkins became the first patient to be committed to Elizabeth Arkham Asylum for the criminally insane, to be personally treated by Amadeus himself. What was once a triumph for his career was now an everyday reminder of his greatest loss.
Batman Arkham Asylum features a few different villains from those found in the comic, namely missing Zeus, Mad Hatter, and Clayface aside from his brief cameo. But the former two find rough replacements in Victor Zsasz and Scarecrow. A lot of the expected heavy hitters are here though, like Killer Croc, Bane, Harley Quinn, Poison Ivy, the Riddler, and of course, the Joker. Now, I don't want to talk too much about the Joker in this section because God knows this series does that enough already to the point that nothing about him can be considered a hidden detail or a secret, and a lot of the stuff that is worth discussion is better tackled in later sections. Basically, he's been planning this escape for months. He started a fire at Blackgate to get goons sent here. He used the alias of Jack White to trick Dr. Young into mass-producing Titan, which is just Bane's venom. He got caught on purpose at the beginning of the game so Batman would come in with him. He escaped using Officer Balls, bwahaha, and his big plan is to fist fight a roided up Batman on the roof of the visitor center for some reason. Most of the Joker stuff is super straightforward in this game, but there are a couple of things that I do think are fun to discuss here. For instance, if you go to the visitor center at intervals throughout this game, you'll be met with a few fun little Joker TV messages, although they're mainly here to add a little flavor, nothing too exciting. Also, the mural of Joker outside the visitor center is built up over time, representing the growing hold that Joker has on the asylum as the game continues. Now, one thing you might notice is that while every single villain here, as well as some others that don't even appear in this game, have dedicated cells in the asylum, the Joker doesn't. It's never explained why, and I haven't been able to find anything tangible about it online either. Some people say that he might be moved from room to room like a revolving door, considering he's never exactly there for very long, but wouldn't that mean they should have a high security room for him to avoid that exact thing? I don't know, it's weird. My personal theory is that the Joker does have a dedicated cell, but that it's being hidden away somewhere due to the highly illegal methods being used as part of his treatment. And even Batman hasn't found it yet. Even though that seems impossible given the gadgets you have in this game, we do get confirmation in later entries that things were happening in the asylum without Bruce's knowledge, so it's not completely unreasonable. The cell could have actually been located outside of the main grounds themselves, since areas like the lighthouse were in fact originally meant to be explorable in the game, which means that they may have secrets that we never got to see. No matter which way you slice it though, it is kind of fishy that we never actually get to see where he's usually kept. And the last couple of tidbits I want to talk about with the Joker are the small references that he makes in the game that tie back to important scenes in the comic. First off, the Rorschach test he pretends to take in his patient interviews.
So, Doc, do you want me to look at the ink blots again? The first one is a kitten I had when I was a child. The second is, let's see, a dead elephant. The third is a...
Funny. Now let's skip the jokes.
Mirror a scene of his fake reading of the ink blots in the comic, where he says he sees things like 2 angels banging in the stratosphere and a Jewish ventriloquist act locked in the trunk of a red Chevrolet. Meanwhile, Batman sees a bat. Dude, you gotta get like a second personality trait at some point, I mean seriously. And one of the throwaway jokes that he announces over the intercom,
Tell me, Bats, what are you really scared of? Failing to save this cesspool of a city? Not finding the commissioner in time? Me in a thong?
might be a nod to the original costume design of the Joker in the comic, which was apparently gonna feature a black leather dress and stilettos to match Madonna's appearance in the music video for Open My Heart. Yeah, that is a real sentence that I just said, and you can fact check it. Unfortunately, the comic and the game passed on this bold design choice, which really sucks because we totally could have had another addition to the Arkham Baddies Club. All I'm saying, Rocksteady, if you want to fix Suicide Squad, sexy Joker. It's just a thought. While there's no official secondary antagonist in this game, for my money it's probably Scarecrow. He shows up throughout the whole game, his nightmare sequences are major highlights of the experience, and he poses the second or maybe even most dangerous threat to Gotham by trying to poison the city's water supply with fear toxin. Just like the Joker, a lot of the sections with him are well-trodden ground. Wait, you're telling me Batman's greatest fear is reliving the night his parents were killed? Yeah, that sounds about right. But Crane's backstory in this game, being a psychiatrist who began to lose his mental faculties following the death of his wife and daughter, is one that the Asylum is all too familiar with. The third Scarecrow nightmare sequence also includes another interesting little side character, Scarface, a puppet who would whisper in the ears of its owner, convincing them to commit terrible crimes. His inclusion in this game is a bit of a strange one, with him also appearing in a glass case near the warden's office, and at the end at Joker's side, even though Arnold Wesker, the ventriloquist who typically carries Scarface by his side, is never never found in any of these games. Scarface as a character is a clever twist on the puppet and puppet master dynamic, where in this case, the puppet is the one influencing whoever's holding it. And there could be a lot of potential reasons why he was included. Maybe the game is saying that Batman is a puppet, with Joker and Scarecrow pulling his strings. Maybe the Joker is a puppet, a slave to all the unfiltered chaos in his mind, just a conduit for all the voices in his head telling him to commit these crimes. Maybe everyone is a puppet, forced to act against our true desires to please somebody else's expectations. But if I'm being honest, I think they just liked the puppet, so they kept him in here. Going back to Crane, he's eventually attacked by Croc in the sewers near the end of the game, and a common theory is that this attack is the reason for his different character design in Arkham Knight. A thug actually confirms in that game that Scarecrow's mask isn't a mask, it's his actual face. The mask has been sewn directly into his mangled mug, likely after he went through reconstructive surgery following this encounter with Croc. But whether that's truly the reason for his design change, or if he managed to escape this particular situation with his face intact, the encounter does show the difference between Killer Croc and Batman's other villains. Because while a lot of them at least occasionally try to play nice with each other, he is wholly and indiscriminately motivated by raw bloodlust. Croc is actually a character that I wish we saw a little bit more of in this game, because while he does have his own section, what he represents to the Asylum is super interesting and actually merits a much bigger focus. In the comic, the description of St. Michael and his victory over the dragon is cut with panels of Batman fighting Croc in present day, even defeating him with the spear that broke off from the St. Michael statue during their fight. The metaphor is about as clear as it gets. Batman is the leader of the army of angels, and Killer Croc is the ultimate form of the irrational. And while you might assume that if any character was going to represent the irrational, it would be Joker, Croc is actually a much better candidate because he doesn't process emotions as complexly as the Joker does. He doesn't get jealous or act manipulative, he doesn't feel anything really besides rage and hunger. He can't be reasoned or bargained with, he would never offer Batman a choice between two bad options, he just kills. If there's any case for a villain that simply can't be redeemed, not because of how far they've gone, but just their lack of any emotion that won't directly cause harm to others, it's Killer Croc. This is shown even further in his interview tapes.
Cash is lucky to be alive. He lost a lot of blood.
Me too. I nearly choked on that bony hand of his.
That's disgusting. He could have died.
He's just food to me. And once I get a taste, I want the rest of the meal. Got your scent too, lady. I'll see you around. Tick-tock, tick-tock.
And it's what makes him the ultimate representation of what Amadeus Arkham worked so hard to fight, now roaming freely under the facility that he spent years building. I feel like a larger focus on Croc, including deriving the Titan formula from him instead of making it brand named Bane Juice, could have gone a lot farther in continuing the themes of this game a little bit further than they actually ended up, but I guess the intention behind Titan still remains roughly the same. Most of the other villains play small roles in the story and aren't really all that interesting past the surface either. Interview tapes with Harley and Ivy show us a lot of the same stories and origins we've had for years, and while Harley's character could have been a good way to show the effects that the insane environment of the asylum could have on a regular person, driving just about any rational mind into madness just by being in the area too long, it's pretty clear from her audio logs that she was a little loopy from the beginning, the perfect canvas for Joker to imprint on. It's also hilarious to me that the Riddler is just allowed to place trophies everywhere, and some of them aren't even hidden, they're just like on a table or something. And so presumably the doctors just let him do the goofy shit he was locked up for and accepted the explanation, it's for Batman. But weirdly enough, this might have actually been a way to try and cure him. It's explained in the comic that some of the doctor's methods for curing the patients are a little bit unorthodox, like how they tried to help Two-Face by giving him a six-sided die to drive his decisions rather than a two-sided coin, and he eventually worked his way all the way up to using tarot cards, drastically expanding the possibilities in his decision-making. Something that seems great in theory, but it actually led to Harvey developing decision paralysis to simple things like whether he should go to the bathroom, although the staff insists that he needs to get worse before he gets better. It's up to the reader to decide whether they actually believe that to be true. The Riddler being allowed to place his trophies around Arkham may have been something similar, since the staff has no reason to believe Batman would actually ever need to come in here and grab these trophies. They may have hoped that seeing his riddles go unanswered would eventually pull him away from the endless game he played with the world's greatest detective. And even though I doubt Rocksteady put this much consideration into the accuracy of the Riddler trophies, I do think allowing him to do do this as part of his treatment is consistent with the kind of strange and often a little stupid methods that Arkham uses to treat its patients throughout all of its iterations. It's also totally possible that the planned version of the Riddler for this game was actually going to be a lot darker than the one we eventually got, seeing as how his cell was originally designed to be smeared with blood rather than the green paint it has in the final game, something that presumably was removed to keep its T rating. Although it's crazy that Victor Zsasz snuck by then if that's the case, because he's shown sporting a body full of scars in the form of tally marks, one for every victim he's killed, but apparently this wall was just too spooky. Each villain contributes in their own little way to the madhouse, giving a twisted depth to the biblical facade of the island and creating that haunting atmosphere that this game is so well known for. But because they demand so much attention, it can distract you from some of the smaller references or little details that send a shiver up your spine, and to get into those, we need to move deeper into the asylum.
Hawkins was the true Arkham Asylum test. If the Mad Dog himself could be tamed, if he could be reintegrated into society as an upstanding citizen, Amadeus Arkham would finally cement himself as a legendary figure in the medical field. While respected and admired for his calm and collected demeanor, inside the man fermented a boiling rage, a disgust for the dog that chose to violate and brutalize his family. But Amadeus moved past that, determined to rehabilitate Hawkins, who had been more cooperative, more humane as the passage of time continued. Yet the death of his family remained at the forefront of the founder's mind.
My family's killer stood in front of me. Years of therapy have deemed him sane. I was proud to see him walk free. In exchange for his liberty, the state required only a signature. He talked about wanting to walk in a park, how he longed to feel fresh air on his face. And then he took my father's fountain pen and killed my secretary. As he was subdued, he screamed out, pleading for forgiveness, for pity. But I had none. I watched as guards beat him to a stain on the floor.
On the anniversary of his family's murder, Amadeus strapped Martin into an electroshock chair and fried the filthy bastard.
Spring was a turning point, a new beginning, a glorious realization of my true destiny. My family's killer perished in an unfortunate accident. These animals cannot be cured. Like dogs, they only respond to discipline. And if that fails, then I was afraid that these accidents would have to continue.
The time spent with Mad Dog in his own madhouse would forever change Amadeus. In the end, Hawkins won. He broke the man who so desperately sought to absolve the killer. The delusions of Arkham had now reached a level of madness he fought to cleanse. Amadeus Arkham spiraled into insanity as his darkest desires called towards him. In a section of the asylum, there is a set of stairs known as the Devil's Slide, a path that leads to the underbelly of the asylum known as the Gallows. The initial idea was for Amadeus to monitor patients away from the common areas. However, upon opening, the gallows had now been repurposed to torture and experiment on the mentally deranged, abusers, killers, and victims who had nobody to look after them, whose only resort was to take refuge in the halls of Arkham Asylum.
I took a walk around my island. I passed by the penitentiary and felt nauseous at the thought of the filth it contained. I looked out over the Gotham Bay, and in the distance I saw lights. No doubt boats bringing more filthy degenerates to my city. I swore again to protect her from this darkness.
Arkham Asylum is a game with a lot of secrets. Some of them are just kind of fun and harmless, like references to the Penguin's Iceberg Lounge, the villain Firefly, and the sequel to this game, Arkham City. Foreshadowing that includes a description of Quincy Sharp's plan to run for mayor, and a super secret room in the warden's office that shows blueprints for the city's construction, a room that was so well hidden that the devs had to actually give the secret away themselves. But I mean, seriously, who just blows up a random unmarked wall multiple times? How was anyone supposed to find this? Some secrets are not even in the game itself, in the form of cut content like the lighthouse I mentioned earlier, another area that was meant to feature a chapel, a cemetery, and the original location of the Batcave, and a hedge maze where a Mad Hatter questline was supposed to take place. Instead, the Hatter's presence is only alluded to in the final game with a picnic set up in the botanical gardens. It is unfortunate that we don't get to see more of him here, considering not only was he in the original comic, but Alice in Wonderland in general was a huge inspiration to the structure and themes of Morrison's book. But Rocksteady felt like there was just no place for him in the story, and cutting out that section did lead to a leaner gameplay experience, which I do appreciate. And then there's the slightly more menacing details, like the mysterious disappearance of Ra's al Ghul's body from the morgue at the end of the game, the Joker teeth appearing during your backtracking, which gives a sense that somebody's always following you, and the fact that Barbara Gordon is almost 6 feet tall and weighs 126 pounds. Eat some protein, woman, goddamn! But one of the things I wondered about most often during my playthrough was the moral standing of the Arkham staff. There's just something off about them. See, in nearly every iteration of Arkham Asylum, there is, to put it bluntly, some bad juju going on here, enough to drive basically anybody insane. Some iterations, including this one, even allude to there being a strange demonic force that contributes to that insanity. And as much as the focus is usually on how it affects the inmates and Batman, you have to wonder what kind of effect that would have on the regular staff that was forced to work there day in and day out. They seem for the most part to be sane or pleasant enough when you interact with them, aside from what might be the most terrifying thing about this game, the facial animations, but I never did feel like I could trust them as much as I should. And playing through the game with that skepticism really gives a darker edge to some of the stuff you see here. For example, the commercialization of Titan shown in some TVs in the medical facility. While wandering the halls, you'll see videos of Dr. Young talking about the benefits of Titan, the fact that it can be used to make some of the weaker patients stronger, both physically and mentally, and that it can actually be used to help people outside of the asylum as well. But we find out later that Joker was actually pushing Dr. Young to continue her research on Titan to kickstart his own plan, threatening her with death if she didn't cooperate, so it's pretty easy to let her off the hook for these videos glorifying the product. But the thing is, it's kind of unclear how the timeline of Titan's development goes, and at what point exactly Joker intervened in the experience that were started by Young. So, while you could say this video was post-Joker takeover of the project, a more cynical perspective would say that she doesn't seem to be coerced in this video, and this could be her actual thoughts and plans around a substance derived from a compound called Venom, which powered one of the world's most insane psychopaths. You're telling me she had no inclination that this could maybe be a bad thing even before Joker got involved? She could easily have ended up in a situation where her research got ahead of her, even if the Joker had never been in the equation. A cynical perspective would also explain why so much of the asylum feels run by the inmates even before Joker's big plan happened. To give an alternate take on my earlier theory, the Riddler being allowed to roam free and place his little question marks everywhere may not have been a means of curing him at all. They may have just not cared that he was doing it. The same way they apparently either didn't notice or didn't care about the little layer that Scarecrow managed to carve out for himself, filled with blueprints of his plan and a bunch of dead people. And maybe the most extreme case of carelessness, Killer Croc's old cell. There are so many dead bodies here, it's ridiculous. Who is this guy eating, and who's feeding him? No one seems to have an answer to this. It's kind of up to you to rationalize it, but to me, the only two logical options are gross negligence, where they just didn't contain him properly and he kept eating people that were near him, and then they just kept sending people still, or the staff was intentionally feeding people to Croc, either as punishment, as a way to fix overcrowding, or just for sport. There's really just no other way that an inmate inside this cell should be able to do this much damage, much less with the evidence still sitting right there. It really brings into question just how much of the asylum staff, outside of maybe a few well-intentioned psychiatrists, were actually here to do the right thing. At the very least, they would all have to partially subscribe to Quincy Sharp's ideology that the best way to treat the patient's insanity was to literally beat it out of them. And their disregard for patient safety and well-being is perfectly encapsulated in the motto of the facility itself. A happy patient is a quiet patient. I guess it doesn't matter how they get there. Before we move on, there are a few miscellaneous details and unsolved mysteries that I wanted to touch on. The first is this doll's head that's found inside a pipe in the West Wing. There's absolutely no explanation for why it's there, and the only thing I can even jumble together is that it may be connected to the dollhouse where Amadeus Arkham discovered his daughter's head on the night of her murder, but there's nothing really to support this besides both things being doll related. There's also apparently a ghost that flashes on screen for some people at points in the game. I never really caught this, and I can only find screenshots from people online of a person you can only see using detective mode with no bones whatsoever. So I don't know if this is a troll or a bug or something really, really rare to find, but I thought it was interesting. And finally, there's all the details and unoccupied cells that allude to the inmates that escaped during the breakout at the beginning, which really shows the ramifications of what Joker did past just what you managed to handle by the end of the game. The Ratcatcher's armor is hiding under a grate, the Calendar Man has a cell in the penitentiary, so does Two-Face, but I think the inmate reference that gave me the weirdest vibe was the seesaw riddle for Tweedledee and Tweedledum. I care a little bit less about the reference to the characters themselves, and I'm more just curious about what a seesaw is doing at an insane asylum. I feel like you could play it off as like shoestring budget entertainment for adult inmates, but it's just weird to have anything playground related at a place like this. And if you feel like I'm reaching here, the game actually has a number of strange details that revolve around children and their place at the asylum, and it's something that we're gonna get into really soon. But before we can discuss the darkest elements of this game, there's one character that I haven't really talked about much that I think is worth his own breakdown. A character who displays behavior insane enough to warrant an entire section of the asylum all for himself, and yet he's never interviewed, never has a cell, and is never even admitted to the asylum. But that doesn't mean he doesn't belong there.
I had a sudden pang of conscience. I sought counsel from my priest on the choices I had made. I asked him if it was a sin to kill in order to save a life. The holy man said all life was sacred, but a judgment would not be upon my soul if I acted to save another. I left the confessional with my soul uplifted, convinced more than ever I am doing a service not only to mankind, but to God as well.
Amadeus Arkham was now in the deep end of his own subconscious desires, obsessed with cleansing Gotham City, to rid the city of degeneracy and filth. It's at this point in which Arkham Asylum no longer becomes a haven for the criminally insane, but a slaughterhouse for those with a tangled mind. One by one, patients of the asylum were picked off in freak accidents, euthanized prematurely, or mysteriously found dead come nightfall. The mental state of Amadeus Arkham would continue to deteriorate for years on end. He became increasingly paranoid as he patrolled the asylum. Laughter would be heard from a cell he knew was empty, a cell that called towards him. He could feel the breath of the asylum. It was alive, and was feeding on madness, his madness. The sick man taped over all the mirrors in his mansion. Amadeus knew it was only a matter of time before he would be exposed for the heinous crimes he had committed. While many would view him as a monster, Amadeus didn't see it that way. From his perspective, he was doing the work of the Lord. The exacerbation of his paranoia would eventually realize his worst fears. In 1929, Amadeus took the life of someone who wasn't deemed clinically insane, for he had killed his own stockbroker for some unforeseen reason. It was the straw that broke the camel's back, for the machinations of Amadeus Arkham had now come to a full stop. Once persecuted, the founder of the asylum was deemed clinically insane, not too dissimilar to the victims he ruthlessly maimed and executed. Amadeus Arkham was now captured and imprisoned in the heart of his own madhouse.
When you first walk out of intensive treatment and see the full view of Arkham Island, there's a very clear shot of Wayne Enterprises overlooking the area on the coast of Gotham. And obviously, it's really easy to pass this off as the devs wanting to have a distinct landmark to show off the location. But I also think it makes a lot of sense for Batman to have such a clear and direct vantage point of Arkham, seeing as how, at any given moment, the highest concentration of dangerous individuals in the world is on that island. I also think, intentional or not, this is a really great representation of what Batman sees himself as, about as close to the asylum as you can possibly get while still having a superiority over the inmates. If you read through the Asylum comic, one thing that'll really jump out at you is how unflattering this depiction of Batman is. Not only is he like really bad at saving people, basically just allowing the Joker to walk around freely when he first gets to the asylum, leading to a seemingly preventable death to which Batman has no reaction, but from the very beginning he comes off a little spineless. He very openly admits that he's afraid of going to the asylum and that it may feel like coming home, and the rest of this book spends time showing just how quickly Batman's mental faculties break down in this setting at a rate that seems much higher than the average person there. As his hunt for different villains throughout Arkham continues, he gets increasingly brutal in his takedowns, pushing Dr. Destiny down a flight of stairs and impaling Killer Croc in the sternum with a spear, eventually entering a standoff with Dr. Cavendish, the doctor who allowed the patients to escape and is now holding a woman hostage. Cavendish very easily manages to grapple Batman to the ground where Bruce begs for help, leading the hostage to slit the doctor's throat and look in horror at what she's done. And despite this clear loss of innocence and what it could potentially do to this woman going forward, the same thing that Batman fights tooth and nail to avoid for himself, his only response to the murder is he got what he deserved. A lot of this book and this whole final sequence can feel very un-Batman, down to his inability to fight a random person and his often unflinching response to death. And obviously that's done to show the effect that the asylum is having on him, but I also think this book overall is a scathing indictment of Batman's entire philosophy. I know the whole Batman is as bad as his villains argument can feel a little bit played out at this point, but in 1989 it was a pretty novel concept to explore, and the game clearly wants to send a similar message about Batman belonging in containment with the rest of his rogues, Joker even saying, "You're always welcome here," just as he does in the final panel of the comic. Attention is drawn to the fact that one of the most psychopathic characters shown in the game, Victor Zsasz, grew up in an environment of relative ease with plenty of money, but he still turned out to be the lunatic he is today, a possible allusion to what Bruce could have turned into if things had played out a little different. And regardless of that, it's pretty obvious that even Bruce thinks he belongs here. A Fear Toxin vision even shows him explicitly being dragged into the asylum by the villains. The message is as subtle as a bag of bricks. But the more interesting question to me personally isn't whether Bruce believes he belongs in the asylum, it's whether he burdens an immense responsibility for the continued degradation of these villains' mental states, a responsibility that's often not acknowledged in most Batman stories. The problem that everyone likes to point out with Batman's ideology is that letting the Joker live puts so much secondhand blood on his hands that he would actually be doing the world a much bigger favor by just killing him straight up than just constantly trying to rehabilitate him. But you can at least make the argument in this case, and most of the comics do, that it's more about not stooping down to the level of the enemy. But something that goes a little bit more overlooked, although it's something that both versions of Arkham Asylum make abundantly clear, is that Batman shows little to no interest in how his enemies are treated after their arrest. Batman's never really been shown to care about whether these people are actually being rehabilitated, what methods are being used to treat them, and the biggest question, if sending them to a facility known for its tangibly depressing and horrifying atmosphere will maybe just make them a lot worse. This is a place that Batman is too scared to even step into in the comic portrayal, and while he's definitely more willing to engage with it in the game, you can see how it does eventually start to take a negative effect on him as the story progresses. So how can he possibly expect the so-called weak-minded people that he sends here to ever get better if just the suggestion of going into Arkham is one that he's uncomfortable with? How can he be so adamant about rehabilitation but have no idea the methods doctors are using to help their patients, no clue that Titan exists, and no knowledge of the clearly shifting power dynamics on the island before his arrival? If you really think about it, this asylum should be the most important place in Batman's life. It's where every single one of his villains goes to maybe be something better, to prove that his belief in second chances is worth half a damn. He even builds a bat cave down there just in case, but he's totally out of the loop with everything going on here? Clueless about a place where there are placards commemorating the Wayne Foundation for their generous donations? He even openly criticizes doctors that are trying to help the patients in both stories. He essentially tells a doctor who thinks Zsasz can be be rehabilitated, that she's wrong and may end up as another Notch, and he calls out Two-Face's tarot card treatment as being unhelpful, despite never taking the time to fix Harvey himself. In fact, at the end of the comic, he reintroduces the coin to Two-Face to make a crucial decision, entirely reversing the work that was done by the doctors, even though he never gave it a chance to begin with. These questions around Batman's philosophy are a big reason why I think this comic has aged as well as it has, and why its core tenets fit so well in Rocksteady's work. That and the striking artwork that still stands out today as something wholly unique in the mainline comic book realm. The narrative and visuals in the Asylum comic are slightly abstract and dreamlike, and that's an intentional decision driven again by the Alice in Wonderland inspiration, not only representing Batman's slow loss of sanity, but also putting the reader through an uncomfortable and confusing experience. There are some sections where you almost can't tell what's happening in a panel and what's even real or a figment of Bruce's imagination. The game is a little bit more straightforward, but it's not without its references to strange spirits that haunt the walls and physical representations of Bruce's mental state. Either way, it's clear that Arkham is not a place where anything productive or positive happens, and even though the Asylum isn't Batman's creation, I do view it as one of his biggest failures. He refuses to do the hardest part of the job that he claims to do, chastises those who attempt anything past brutalization, and constantly plays the games that enable the inmates' insane behavior. Arkham Asylum is a dumping ground for Batman to feel less guilty about himself, and while we've already proven that to be a pipe dream driven by negligence, there are somehow even darker secrets that Bruce never actually finds out, which show the true scope of that failure.
Amongst the vast number of cells within Arkham Asylum rests a man plagued by visions of his past. Memories suppressed by his well-intentioned desires float to the surface of his consciousness. In 1920, trees thrash in the dark under a restless sky. Rain rattles the windows. It was the fateful night of his mother's passing. Amadeus was afraid. He was confused as his mother wailed and cried. Visions of a beast with great wings arrive. It comes every night. Amadeus finally sees it. He finally understands his mother's torture. All the years of pain, of pity, now realized into the creature he's gazing at. A bat. A great, ominous bat that petrifies Elizabeth. She pleads towards her son to not let it take her, as he reassures her that everything will be okay.
Don't be afraid, Mother. I love you.
Madness was born in the blood of Amadeus Arkham. It is his birthright. He didn't just inherit the wealth of his family, he inherited an illness that has generationally plagued the Arkhams for decades. It ate at Amadeus as he tried to be normal, but deep down he always knew. Now alone in his cell, he sees his madness as a virtue. Sanity is only a prison to him. His mind is now free, yet it's still haunted by the bat. Through the years of isolation, Amadeus read about shamanic practices and magical rituals that would combat the bat. In his confinement, he carved bindings of a spell with his fingernail. It took years, as his bloodied finger traced every square inch of his cell.
Whole and complete and free to rest. It's finished. I'm Arkham. I'm home. I'm where I belong.
There are certain secrets in Arkham Asylum that are never actually explained or even alluded to in the game itself, but years of players analyzing footage, reading supplementary materials, and just questioning why certain things are placed the way they are, have uncovered the even darker underbelly of an already macabre, soulless island. One particular secret involves underground tests performed on inmates that led to much more tragic results than the Titan experiments that the game centers on. Testing was done unbeknownst to really anyone at Arkham actually, save from the facilitator of the experiments, Dr. Dr. Hugo Strange. Strange's experiments specifically targeted those asylum inmates who had lost or been abandoned by their families, and with as few concerned eyes on them as possible, he was able to recruit their unwitting help without arousing suspicion. Arkham Asylum was where he first started developing the methods which would eventually create his army of perfect servitude that we see in Arkham City. Strange's victims were starved, tortured, and lobotomized, and while some escaped to the caves during Joker's prison break, others were eventually used as target practice for the Penguin's men, and others still committed suicide by jumping off an infamous location in the asylum. Dead Man's Point is a spot famous enough for its own nickname, and it's one that Batman is very familiar with himself, having placed his Batcave right under it. The game makes a big deal out of this cliffside and its dark history, which directly reflects what the living conditions of many inmates must be like. But something I've always wondered is, if the spot is known for people plunging to their deaths, why are there so many skulls inside the cave at the apex of the jump? I mean, I know there's skulls like everywhere in this game, and it's kind of ridiculous sometimes, and it's a very comical representation of, ooh, this place is really spooky, but this feels a little bit more deliberate, especially because they seem to be poking out of broken walls that suggest a room or cell used to be up here. I'm curious if this was maybe an early location for some of Strange's experiments, where he could just grab inmates going up to jump and use them as dispensable lab rats. Or maybe somebody was grabbing the dead from the rocks below and placed them here as a collection of sorts. I'm not entirely sure, but somehow I feel like the exceedingly large number of suicides may not actually have been the darkest thing to happen here. Something the asylum is actually very open about though, even though it doesn't feel like they should be, is their work in psychologically evaluating children. There are infomercials that urge parents to send their troubled youths in for psychiatric help, insisting that despite Arkham's supervillain housing reputation, they also handle regular crazy people, like your store-bought white bread psychos. These advertisements give the impression that kids would only be held for the duration of an evaluation, but considering the seesaw from earlier, they may have actually been kept here for much longer. In fact, the maze with the Mad Hatter quest, which was eventually cut, was apparently originally designed to entertain children at the asylum. And if that isn't bad enough, there are a few cells in the penitentiary that feature children's drawings all over the walls, and the same room as a few straight-up serial killers. It is an open secret that there's something hinky going on at Arkham Asylum. Commissioner Gordon even has to baby boo-boo Batman before he goes in there in the comic, like, hey man, are you sure you want to go inside? It's pretty scary in there, buddy. But somehow the staff and the city are okay with sending developing children to a cell one room over from the guy who carves his victims into his flesh? How... Who is signing off on this? The sheer breadth of the horrible treatment so many patients had to suffer while locked away in Arkham is pretty insane, and one specific case of torture has actually become one of the game's most popular fan theories ever since the first VR spin-off game came out. In the medical facility, there's a hallway that probably doesn't seem too familiar to you unless you're a weird little mind freak, until you see this footage from the VR game of Joker torturing Jason Todd, and you can tell it takes place in the same hallway. Back in the 2009 game, there are signs of a struggle in this hall, so it may be entirely possible that Jason was in fact recently held in this hallway, and he had been moved even just minutes prior to Batman's arrival to keep him from Bruce's sight, since the timeline of this game does line up with the full year that Jason was trapped and abused. Of course, I hate to burst on the bubble of this theory, but like some people have already said, this is probably just a case of reused assets, partially because I don't know, I don't think the VR game is exactly an indication of what Rocksteady was trying to do with this hallway, and also because Jason was confirmed to be primarily held in an abandoned wing of Arkham. But at the very least, these similarities serve as a reminder of what else was happening in the asylum right under Batman's nose. If not in this room, then in an area off to the side that you never end up exploring. It is creepy to think that between his little PA announcements and TV appearances, Joker may have been brutalizing this poor kid on the side, especially when you hear him make direct references to Jason's apparent death in the game.
Hell, I may even give you Harley. It looks like you could use a new sidekick.
It's clear from everything we've talked about so far that this island has both a tragic past and present, spanning back to before it was even converted to a psychiatric hospital. And up until the minute Batman arrives, and maybe even during his stay there, the torture, unsanctioned experiments, and degradation of everyone and everything who found themselves unlucky enough to be in this wretched place were much more common than any instance of success or progress. But thankfully, at the end of Arkham Asylum, Batman wins. He smacks Joker upside the head with his patented exploding punch move, the Joker gets locked up, and that means everything is fixed now. Right?
After the death of its founder, the asylum would struggle to make ends meet. Amadeus was forgotten. The asylum was underfunded, and criminals were now being sent to Blackgate Penitentiary. Gotham City would continue to develop. The Wayne Foundation rose to the top of the food chain. All the while, corruption and greed expanded as the various crime families of Gotham entrenched themselves into the system. Politicians were nothing more than puppets, controlled in the shadows. One notable up-and-coming politician was Quincy Sharp, a spineless man working his way up the Gotham ladder. Whispers from an organization promised Sharp the mayoral throne of Gotham, so long as he restarted the infamous Arkham Asylum. Seeing as how lunatics with theatrics were becoming an increasingly common sight, Sharp was able to re-establish Arkham Asylum and house the criminally insane under his rule. The dilapidated remains of the asylum were gradually fixed to a workable state. As a means of research for his newfound job as the warden, Sharp began to read up on the history of Arkham Asylum, and in turn, learned about its founder. The journal entries left the warden smitten with fascination. The more he read, the more he related to Amadeus. As the journal entries became more unhinged, so too would the new inmates of the asylum. Criminals like Poison Ivy, Scarecrow, Joker, Killer Croc, and the Riddler were unique patients with specialized treatment. As each and every criminal found its way into the asylum, Sharp found that the pit in his soul was sickened to its core. Sharp confided in the Journal of Arkham. The more he read, the more he began to think that he was possibly the reincarnation of Amadeus. The sickening beliefs, the defeatist philosophy, and the moral obligation to God. Sharp invented the spirit of Arkham to justify his actions, claiming that the ethereal ghost of the asylum's founder was taking control of his free will. Sharp had now blurred the lines between reality, becoming yet another lunatic in Arkham Asylum. During the Arkham Asylum incident, the Batman stumbles across several mystical tablets adorned with a beetle, a symbol of rebirth. Eventually, the Dark Knight would uncover the mystery of the tablets, discovering Sharp's fragile mental state and the crimes that he had committed. Unfortunately, there were bigger fish to fry that night, and Sharp wouldn't receive his justice until the events of Arkham City.
My name is Quincy Sharp, the spirit of Amadeus Arkham. You have done well to decipher my story, and I pray it has helped you on your path. I trust that through my writings you will do what is right. Please, I implore you, continue my work. This city deserves a savior. Continue my work.
Looking back at some of the decorations of Quincy Sharp in the asylum after we learn of his schizophrenic ideations of himself as a spiritual continuation of Amadeus Arkham, they take on a bit of a new color. Turns out, he really meant it when he said he was the voice of Arkham. And for the biggest mystery, at least the biggest mystery that the game acknowledges, to center around Sharp's belief that he is Amadeus reincarnate, and for the main symbol of the game to be the scarab beetle, symbol of rebirth, it's not hard to see Arkham Asylum as an institution that represents a vicious cycle. Inmates come in, they suffer or refuse treatment, they often escape, and then they just wind up back in here. It's a cycle that reflects even patient zero of the asylum, Mad Dog Hawkins, which later goes on to drive Amadeus into the same pattern. But even before Mad Dog, the grounds which would later become the asylum seemed cursed, with a mother who would lie in bed, shrieking in terror at a symbol only she could see, and a son forced to take her life to ease her from the pain. A pain that he would later inherit, seeing his own nightmares of the same symbol which he tried to keep at bay by etching protective spells into the stone of his cell, the symbol of a bat. Depending on your level of optimism, you can see Batman's presence in this game as the completion of the work Amadeus tried so hard to carry out, a faint light at the end of this dark, twisted tunnel, or as a cruel joke in the face of Arkham's legacy. What the Arkham family had feared most was now inside their walls, inside the very room where Amadeus worked feverishly to ward him off. But Bruce is also plagued by those same nightmares, and his strength to turn that trauma into a symbol of hope is what Amadeus was always fighting for. I personally see this as more of an ongoing question. Clearly, Batman is still haunted by these images, even though he tries to embrace it, and it constantly leads to him towing a fine line between heroism and insanity. So will he succeed where Amadeus failed, or will he become a personification of these nightmares and continue the cycle? The game does a good job of drawing plenty of connections between the Asylum's patients and Batman to keep the answer to that question as muddy as possible. His upbringing is similar to Victor Zsasz, his family's contribution to Gotham, and his own lofty goals of protecting the city from the criminally insane align with Amadeus Arkham. There have of course always been comparisons between Batman and the Joker throughout their history, and one of my favorite small references is in the third Scarecrow nightmare, where we see a scene where Batman is tied to an electric chair that Scarecrow is operating. This feels like a direct recreation of Mad Dog's death in the comic, and with Scarecrow's history being so closely related to Amadeus's, something that his first interview tape mentions, it looks like in this nightmare, Batman is the stand-in for one of the most grotesque and merciless characters across both the comic and the game. This feels like a really interesting representation of Batman's mental state. He believes that he is capable of being the ultimate good, but also the most grotesque evil, and in his head, time will only tell where he ends up. But even if Batman succeeds in his own personal war against insanity, it'll be superficial in a way, because everything that he's done to this point has only led to delaying further tragedies, not actual reform. True victory would likely only come if Amadeus's original vision of the asylum was realized, a place where the most depraved and tortured minds in Gotham could be treated in lasting ways. And it seems like the authors of these works are suggesting that that's not always possible, with Morrison's version of the Mad Dog story ending with Amadeus killing him out of spite after seeing no improvements for over a year, and Rocksteady's version showing him actually being deemed fit for a return to society and then immediately committing murder the second he's uncuffed. Although that might have been a fake ending created by the warden just to justify his personal thoughts on how the inmates should be treated. It's hard to say which version is more pessimistic, but it's clear that at least in the game, the staff and leadership has basically given up on even trying to help the inmates. They don't even view many of these patients as human, running ads that distinguish between treatment facilities for supervillains and normal people, even though most of Batman's villains aren't even super. They're just more messed up than your average crazy person. They dehumanize their own patients and show little to no interest in rehabilitation outside of a few half-assed interviews. And despite you winning at the end of the game, you don't actually solve any of the systematic problems here. In fact, they only increase in influence in the next game. Maybe the most horrific part of Arkham Asylum is that it's allowed to continue and expand, its core ideas somehow still being accepted as helpful, and blame always being spread to bad actors within the system rather than the system itself. Which is why no matter how many times Batman succeeds and how many evil plots are foiled, the asylum is always full and Gotham is never safe. The cycle will always continue. And if you think that's depressing, you should do some research into the history of psychiatric hospitals in real life, because surprise, a lot of the victim blaming, horrible conditions, back alley experiments, and complete negligence highlighted in Arkham Asylum is a pretty harsh reflection of what these institutions have represented for centuries. I mean, just the fact that there's an interchangeability between the word patient and inmate in a facility like this can not have a positive effect on their psyche. Obviously, terminology and infrastructure has improved over time, but the work is still very much in progress, and it's worth addressing that we also often turn a blind eye to these facilities, hoping and believing without any confirmation that good things are happening there, when in actuality, we're indirectly allowing people to be treated poorly by never showing we care about their well-being. Asylums are easy to ignore as long as they're far away from normal people. Well, that's a sad way to end things. Batman Arkham Asylum has a lot of influence today. It's the basis of a lot of modern superhero games and is kind of the benchmark against which later entries would be measured. And even though some of the gameplay and visual elements have become a little bit outdated, it's still a fan favorite. And I think its approach to horror, from the obvious to the highly suggestive, is a huge part of why. And while later games would lose its tight grip on pacing and a sense of dread, they still have that horror backbone that winds up defining the whole series. And I know that some of what I talked about here might have exceeded the bounds of what Rocksteady actually included in the game intentionally, but to me, the mark of a great piece of psychological horror is its ability to be consistent enough to allow people to make connections the creators never planned for and still have the themes and narrative remain intact. And this game absolutely does that. There are now rumors of Rocksteady working on another Batman game following the failure of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, and I'm a little conflicted on the direction they should take if that rumor does end up being true. The style of the existing Arkham trilogy is straight up crack, but I also don't want the series to become a shell of itself, so maybe a new direction would be good for it. Regardless of that future though, Batman Arkham Asylum has truly cemented itself as a quintessential experience that I admittedly lost some interest in over time since it plays a little clunkier than the others, but I now have a lot of newfound respect for it. It's just so creepy and engaging while still being cartoonish and a little goofy. Playing through it again was just a ton of fun, and if you want to hear more about mine and Landen's thoughts on the full game, not just a horror deep dive, remember to check out that video over on my second channel. Thanks again to Landen for helping me with this video. I highly encourage you guys to go check him out. He does a lot of stuff similar to this. I took a ton of inspiration from him. He's the first link in the description. Go show him some love. I hope you all enjoyed. I had a really fun time making this video, and I'll see you all in the next one. Happy Halloween!